Good evening. I think we'll start. There's some latecomers straggling in. Um, Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Asia Society Museum. To tonight's event on New York Arab Culture Forum, Art for Sustainable Futures. My name is Boon Hui Tan. I'm the Vice President for Global Arts and Cultural Programs at the Asia Society, as well as Director of the Asia Society Museum. Asia Society and Age of Arabia, in partnership with UNESCO, is very proud to present this evening's program on New York Arab World Culture Forum, Art for Sustainable Futures. We've got quite a lot of speakers today, so I won't take up too much of your time, but just to make one sort of observation, or rather point that I personally believe in quite intensely, which is that in recent years, those of us who are working in the arts all around the world, I come from Asia, artists, curators, festival programmers, and other professionals in museums, art institutions, and all sorts of independent art spaces, we find ourselves working in a very different world, even 5-10 years ago. Economic, political, technological, and social transformations have changed two things. One, the circumstances under which artists who are at the core of what we do practice their vocation, as well as the changing demands placed on art by the public. I think the way in which art is received is no longer so innocent. And is constantly subject to all sorts of changing frames and references. So in this condition where we find constantly shifting ground in which art and artists and the art object struggles to find a voice, there is an increasing urgency for us to nourish and sustain the conditions under which artists can practice, under which the artwork can convey its messages, under which the voices that come from art and from culture can be allowed to speak out. So, in fact, in the exhibition currently on view upstairs in our galleries, which is called The Progressive Revolution, Modern Art for a New India, we focus on that particular group of artists, the Bombay Progressives, who emerged, in post-1947 India and articulated a particular vision in the midst of great adversity, their vision of a multicultural and secular new nation, where possibilities and opportunities could be imagined after virtually 300 years of the British Raj. They imagined a kind of new world where the legacies of the past were not traps and chains, but rather ways to enrich and open up new imagined futures. Today, art institutions, including the Asia Society, have found a renewed urgency in providing platforms where the voices of artists, particularly those operating in fragile and uncertain environments, can be allowed to surface. That is really sort of important to us because we found that we are living in a kind of world where that can't be taken for granted. So tonight, we are here to explore the role of the arts and artists in building a more sustainable future by supporting the United Nations goals for sustainable development. We're pleased to have with us Stephen Stapleton, the co-founder of Age of Arabia, who will moderate a discussion with artists Razan Al-Sarraf, Matthew Mazzotta, and Rashad Salim. We're also glad that Marie Rodil, UNESCO representative to the United Nations, and Rob Skinner with the UN Office of Partnerships are also here to introduce the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So, of course, we'd like to acknowledge all our partners for this event, Age of Arabia, UNESCO, the United Nations, the New York Arab Art and Education Initiative. A bit of flag waving. The Asia Society Museum benefits immensely from the support provided by the Asia Society Global Council on Asian Arts and Culture, the Asia Society Friends of Asian Arts, the Arthur Ross Foundation, the Cheryl and Charles R.K. Endowment for Contemporary Art Exhibitions, the Hazen Polsky Foundation, Mary Grigsburg Fund, Mary Livingston Griggs and Mary Grigsburg Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts. A special thank you also to our members and friends of Asian art who are at the audience. You are our biggest cheerleaders, and we thank you for your unflinching support. As part of the exhibition on modern Indian art upstairs, until the January, we are celebrating a whole season of India with a whole ton of activities to educate and introduce the art and culture of India to the public. If you're interested, please look at our website, www.asiasociety.org. A bit of housekeeping. Out of respect to the speakers this evening, please turn off your handphones, put them on silent or vibrator mode, but don't vibrate too loudly. And please note that video recording and photography is not allowed. Please, I'm very happy now, of course, to quickly kick off the program by introducing our moderator for today's program, who will also tell us a little bit more about the wider initiative. Stephen Stapleton is the co-founder of Age of Arabia, an arts collective established in 2003 on the border between Yemen and Saudi Arabia. Since then, Stapleton has pioneered an artist-led model for cultural exchange across contested borders. Stapleton has produced over 50 international exhibitions, including many at museums and biennials in Berlin, Dubai, Istanbul, London, New York, Riyadh, Venice, and elsewhere. Stephen, please.
Thank you. It's like so bright up here, so I can't see anybody, which is good. And Boon Hui, I apologize because the Asia Society logo is slightly off screen, which I worked so hard to compose those logos, so I apologize for that. Good evening, everybody, and thank you to Boon Hui Tan and for his team for all their efforts in making tonight's event possible. I'd like to start by thanking Asia Society for hosting this event and all of our partners across New York, ranging from, let's get my name up there, there you go, ranging from major museums, arts foundations, community activist groups, public schools, independent spaces, who have come together to support this initiative and the ideals we aspire to today. I would also like to thank our small but dedicated team who have worked tirelessly over recent weeks and months to bring all of the separate strands of this ambitious program together. I think they're here today, so I want to thank in person Anthony, Genoa, Razan, who will be taking part in the panel later, Mohammed, Faisal, and Lucas, who built the website, which I'm going to encourage you all to visit after tonight's event. Since this event is also being live webcast, I'd like to acknowledge my longtime colleague in Jeddah, Mohammed Ali, real name, and strong man, and our wonderful team in London, including Cuba, our designer, Imogen, Valeria, and Arga. Many of you know these characters, and they work tirelessly for the common good. I'd also like to give a special thanks to Kate Seeley from the Middle East Institute, long-term colleague and collaborator, Mohammed Shakar, a dear friend and the first person that actually introduced us to the concept of collaborating with the United Nations, Jasmine, and I'd like to thank my girlfriend Helena and her dad who fitted me with a new suit last night. And also to our communications team, Ben, Dixon, Kim, and Liza, thank you so much for the initial connection with the Asia Society in the first place and all your work over the last months. This has not been an easy week to launch the Arab Arts and Education Initiative. It has been a time for all of us working in arts and culture in the Arab world to reflect on, question, and evaluate the impact of the work we are doing and the context in which we are working. As many of you might have read in the New York Times, we have been under some pressure to postpone or cancel this program in light of the terrible news about Jamal Khashoggi and our organization's long-term connections with Saudi Arabia. It has been especially hard, and many of you don't know this, since many of us in the team organizing this event knew Jamal or his children personally. His children are part of a community of artists and designers with which we regularly collaborate. These events prompted memories from my first visit to Saudi Arabia during an artist journey across the Middle East in 2003, which you can see here. I had crossed the border from Yemen, there's a pointer here, down here, into Saudi Arabia on a public bus and was dropped off under the light of a neon palm tree. And Jamal was the first person I met in Saudi Arabia. I was dropped off in the center of Abha and taken by taxi to the headquarters of Al Watan newspaper. At that time, Al Watan was one of the most progressive newspapers in Saudi Arabia, edited by Jamal. I remember he showed me around the offices and printing presses and then drove me to the Al Miftaha Arts Village, where I was introduced to Ashraf Fayad, Abdul Nasser Gharim, and Ahmed Mata, artists with whom I would later establish Edge of Arabia. My encounter with that extraordinary community of artists, poets, and journalists in 2003 was set against the first days of the last Gulf War, and many of our conversations revolved around the role of the artist when faced with such fear and conflict. The aspirations born from those early encounters to mobilize artists towards a greater contribution to world affairs, to harness artist point of view storytelling as an alternative to the mainstream media narrative, and to encourage open border crossing dialogue has inspired the work we have been doing since, including the launch of Edge of Arabia as an independent exhibitions platform in 2008. Today, and I don't know what this means, but today is in fact the 10-year anniversary to the day of the first Edge of Arabia exhibition at the University of London. And this picture was taken on the 16th of October, 2008. Our more recent project, Culture Runners, this is the Culture Runners RV in downtown Manhattan, invited Middle East artists to travel across and explore the United States away from the urban centers in a converted RV. And this RV has traveled 30,000 kilometers now across the United States. This was at Standing Rock. The one before was a Palestinian artist called Yazan Khalili at just outside of a town called Palestine, and he was searching for all the towns called Palestine in the United States. Many of you have been on that RV, and it's parked in New Jersey now, having a good rest. These are the journeys which led up to establishing this initiative today, and the reason that during intense phone calls with journalists and partners over the last few days, keeping in mind the values that underpin all of our work, that we collectively decided to move forward with the initiative. With Jamal and his family in our thoughts and prayers, we want to reiterate our commitment to amplifying the voices of artists, trying to make the world a better place, and getting their voices out into the public domain. And so, on Sunday, we were proud to launch this timely initiative with the opening of the Syria 100 Years of Refugee Stories exhibition at Brooklyn Museum. On Thursday, you can attend an artist discussion where Jinan Maki Bacho, Issam Kourbaj, and Mohammed Hafez, who I believe are here with Aisin, the curator, here there they are in the middle there, the curator of the exhibition from Brooklyn Museum. Yesterday, MoMA hosted a fantastic film program with Kuwaiti artist Munira Al-Qadiri, and I'd like to thank Jay Levinson especially, who's here today and has followed this project from its infancy to its rather dramatic opening. Tomorrow we have the dual Artex opening for the Young Arab Artist exhibition curated by Razan Sharaf, and the Arab Street Artist residency featuring Abdullah Kandil and Athir. And I'd like to thank Phoenix, who's hosting us there. I have a little video I'd like to play of Athir in the building, working on his paintings, and invite you all to join us tomorrow from 7 p.m. for the opening party of that space. Over the weekend, you can visit resident artist Farah Al-Qasimi at the Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts, or hop down to Chinatown on Friday to explore artist books and rare vinyl from the Arab world at Two Bridges in partnership with Fully Booked. Next week, Palestinian artist and scholar Samia Halaby will be speaking at the Guggenheim. And if you're an Arab World curator and museum scholar, you might be lucky enough to be invited to the Metropolitan Museum of Art Scholarly Seminar to explore how museums today collect and exhibit modern and contemporary art from the Middle East. On Sunday, don't miss the Poets of Little Syria guided tours at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. with Washington Street Historical Society, who are partnering with Pioneer Works to create an augmented reality app in order to preserve the historic Arab-American immigrant neighborhood that many of you know about. I have a short video here of a poetry reading by Inia Engler as part of the tour that happened last Saturday. And I want to thank the video team, Sahir and Asya, who are at the back, who have been making these videos every day as we go along. And you can follow them on social media, but they deserve a clap. Through the course of these events of the 10-day launch program, we look forward to welcoming men and women from all backgrounds and religions, whether Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, Catholic or Protestant, Sunni or Shia, atheist or agnostic. All are invited to come together around the universal language of art and for the common purpose of imagining a better world. New York deserves it. We have been invited and are deeply honored to launch this initiative in partnership with UNESCO. And as our response to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for us all. This is our effort to engage artists and cultural organizations in the world's only plan for a better world. Our hope is that by fostering meaningful partnerships, which we'll hear about later, between artists and arts organizations in the US and Arab world and the UN, we can contribute to establishing best practices and to providing models for better engagement, better collaboration, better communication, in order to counteract some of the prevailing polarity that we're seeing on the global political stage. In a moment, I will pass you to my colleague and friend, Marie Rudil, UNESCO representative to the UN, to tell you more. But I'd like to end by making a case for the artist's role in all of this. Artists matter because they change the way we consider the status quo. They can channel their power of imagination into solutions to global issues. They can address gaps in the system. And it is often society's cultural leaders who serve as its conscience and its change makers. This is why it is absolutely vital that artists be part of the conversations towards addressing the global challenges such as hunger, poverty, inequality, peace, and justice. Now over to Marie.
Yes. Thank you, Stephen. I'm so pleased to be here tonight at the Asia Society. It's especially as this gathering brings together such a high expertise on the issues pertinent to art society. I am confident that the discussion tonight will highlight a fundamental question. What role can art and artists play in building a more sustainable future? Each of us has a story about the impact of art on our lives. Think about it. Art is an expression of our shared cultural heritage, as well as a transmitter of new ideas. It reflects our own individual values while holding up a mirror to the values of society. Culture and art can play a leading role in bolstering the creative economy locally and regionally, as well as in promotion of intercultural dialogue, cohesion, and tolerance. You will remember in 2015, in New York, all the 193 member states of the United Nations adopted the 2030 agenda, the agenda we are calling for sustainable development, an ambitious universal agenda to end poverty by 2030 and pursue a sustainable future, leaving no one behind. Through its 17 goals, the agenda commits every country to take an array of actions that would not only address the root causes of poverty, but would also increase economic growth and prosperity and meet people's health, education, and social needs while protecting the environment. As the UN agency specialized in the field of culture, UNESCO led the advocacy efforts to achieve the recognition of culture's role for sustainable development. We highlighted culture's community-wide social, economic, and environmental impact. It has not been so easy. Culture is not easy to be considered as a real tool, as a real challenge for the economic and political world. But finally, after the adoption of the 2030 Agenda, the international community recognized in a resolution adopted by the General Assembly for the first time the role of culture as an enabler of sustainable development. You will find the UNESCO brochure in front of the room, which showcases how culture is integrated in development policies and actions and demonstrates through concrete examples the broad scope of culture's contribution to sustainable development. For those of you who are interested, some copies of the publication are available. Culture and art may contribute to a number of targets of the global goals on quality education, promoting gender equality, alleviating poverty, improving societies through technological transformation, and making our cities more sustainable. Driven by this aspiration and fulfilling its mandate role, UNESCO supports member states to integrate culture into development policies and programs. Much of our work on culture is done through the 6 cultural conventions, providing a comprehensive framework to safeguard and promote culture in all its expressions: tangible, intangible, natural, movable, or underwater heritage, as well as cultural expression and creative industries. Nowadays, the cultural and creative industries are among the fastest growing sectors in the world, creating nearly 30 million jobs worldwide, especially for youth, employing more people aged 15 to 29 years old than any other sector. The cultural and creative industries can make up to 11% of all employment within a country. We have a convention that has been adopted in 2005, that is called Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expression, which sets principles for the design and implementation of policies and measures that give adequate support to contemporary cultural expression and creative economy. You will find some information on this convention in the room, but this convention is really a tool for promoting the role of art and the artist in the world. Finally, UNESCO Creative Cities Network, a global network of 180 cities from 72 countries, is working every day towards the achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development at the world cities. And 2 weeks ago, I think, Indonesia was celebrating the UNESCO Creative Cities Network at the UN headquarters, and very soon a worldwide meeting will take place in Bali, promoting and reinforcing the network among these cities in the world. Dear friends, culture not only contributes to the achievement of development goals, but as Stephen was saying rightly, culture also plays a key role in fostering social cohesion and cultural diversity. Oh, it is nice to see and to have seen last week in this wonderful center all the artists coming from Syria, Iraq, from this Arab work together, working together, and really celebrating the art here in this city of New York, celebrating the art as a tool to create a network, a feeling of mutual understanding between themselves and the visitors of the center, between themselves and the New York community. Nothing else could be more proactive than the art to create such an environment of mutual understanding. Culture reminds us that despite our differences, it is absolutely crucial for us to engage in dialogue with one another, to move towards a better world together. Promoting artistic creativity in the service of mutual respect, understanding, and continuous dialogue is key to achieving all the Sustainable Development Goals. UNESCO remains committed to providing a forum where artists and cultural professionals can continue to express themselves, to stimulate new ideas, to challenge mindsets, and to inspire us all to pursue a better world. I am sure that this two-night event is contributing to build this better world. Thank you very much. And of course, now I will invite the panelists to come up on the stage and to develop and to reinforce our exchange. And thank you so much again, and congratulations for this beautiful initiative. Thank you.
Do these work? Do these work? Do your mics work? Oh, there you go.
They work.
Such good. The Asia Society is so on it when it comes to technology and all these things that normally go wrong. Here we go. It is actually a very special moment for us four. I think actually everyone's been on different journeys to get to this panel today. And we're very excited about the conversation, which hasn't happened before in this topic, but also between us. I'm going to say a little bit about each person, just to introduce them with a short bio and how we met. And then we're going to have separate presentations, 5-6 minutes. I've been strict before. And then we were going to have a little conversation between us before opening it to a Q&A. And then rounding off with Robert Skinner from the UN Partnerships Department with a call to action at the end. Rashad Salim, who is in New York for the first time, in the United States for the first time. I've been trying to get Rashad here for at least 3 years, and he arrived yesterday. And Rashad was born in 1957 in Sudan to Iraqi artist, diplomat father, and a German mother. Rashad's international upbringing, coming of age in Iraq and later exile, inform his expeditionary art, seeking insight and beauty from civilization's cradle to its teeters on the grave's edge. Rashad studied at the Institute of Fine Art in Baghdad and St. Martin's in London. In 1977-78, he took part in the Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl's Tigris expedition. If you don't know Thor Heyerdahl, I'm partly Norwegian, so this is like our most famous and important sort of hero. So when I heard that Rashad was actually the only Iraqi crew member on that expedition, where Thor Heyerdahl often created a United Nations sort of formula of different nationalities, and I think they flew the UN flag on that. Indeed, yeah. In 2015, he launched Ark Reimagined, which we will hear about later today, a project questioning what the Ark, Noah's Ark, would have looked like if it was based on the ecology and craft traditions of Mesopotamia and built using materials and techniques during that period. In 2016, he established Safina Projects to deliver that project. Rashad and I first met when I worked at the British Museum. I sent Rashad into a particularly tough East London school where he taught them about 12 different categories of headgear. And that was an exciting project, and the teachers were definitely a little bit interested in what came out of the classroom on those things. So that's Rashad. In the middle, we have Razan Al-Sarraf, who is the curator of the Young Arab Artists exhibition that you can come and see tomorrow from 7 o'clock at Artex, and she's also one of the main artists in that show. But Razan actually came to us as an intern and has had the fastest career trajectory of anyone I've ever met, because she's now the main curator and on the main panel here tonight. Deservedly. And that's a testament actually to when she started in her own humble way to show us the work that she was doing and her sensibilities. This is the right platform for Razan, and representing the younger generation, because we're all a little bit older now. Razan Saraf is a Kuwaiti-born artist based in New York. Through painting, she examines the social, religious, and political climate of the Middle East. Razan is a recipient of the Ministry of Higher Education of Kuwait Merit Scholarship, the SVA Alumni Society Scholarship and Award, as well as multiple Kuwait Culture Academic Merit Awards. You haven't mentioned the Edge of Arabia internship, but I'm going to add that there. She has exhibited, sorry?
I'll add a bottom tag.
Yeah, I put it in there. She's exhibited internationally, and I really can't wait for New York audiences to experience her work. Matthew Mazzota, we met at MIT in 2014 at the launch of Culture Runners, where Matthew was teaching at MIT at the time. And since then, we've been on multiple journeys, including to Jeddah, and to Nebraska, and all over the United States. I know, he'll talk about that connection, actually, which is not as absurd as it sounds. Matthew Mazzota works at the intersection of art, activism, and urbanism, focusing on the power of the built environment to shape our relationships and experiences. He received a BFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, a Master's of Science from MIT, and is a Loeb Scholar at Harvard, currently a Loeb Scholar at Harvard.
Well, yeah, I'm a Loeb Fellow.
A Loeb Fellow. That's forever, is it?
That's forever.
That's forever.
Fellowship.
There you go. So I'm so excited to bring us together under the framework of artists looking at this area of sustainable futures and the Sustainable Development Goals. So actually, Rashad will go first, and I put this next slide in. I just want to immediately, oh, that's not the right one. That's the right one. I want to immediately, for Rashad's project, Art Reimagined, Rashad actually came from Iraq 2 weeks ago via Sweden, but this puts us really in the situation where Rashad has been working on the project.
Can that be synced with it? No, Rashad. Now this is 5 years ago, and my first return to Iraq after being away since the 80s, on the Tigris flotilla expedition that took place from. Sorry, but there was supposed to be over there. Anyway. So I mean that's the difficulty of speaking over his singing, because he's
He's singing about you.
He is singing about me. It's extemporizing, and as we're going down on this Gufwa and the Tigris. So that's 5 years ago, and the beginning of a journey that I'm continuing now, and that will continue for quite a while. But it's really important that it's this reconnection with the river itself, with the land itself. And during that trip, what I noticed very clearly was the desertification of that river. Over here you have pictures of the marshes, and this is in the mid-70s, at the height of the fertility of the marshes. There was no real problems at the time, right before they started to be destroyed by the building of dams and wars, etc.
Is Rashad's microphone working okay? It's going. Could we, because we're meant to be we're meant to be speaking to this screen. Sorry to interrupt, but this screen is showing something very different.
Yes.
So I don't know if there's a way to. Otherwise, Rashad, maybe you're going to have to watch out when you turn around because the mic goes off.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
You got it now.
Alhamdulillah. Yeah, you get a crick in the neck. Yeah. It's a long story, so putting it in 7 minutes, you have to really sort of, give you a bit of room. So this is the marshes in 1977, 76. Thor Heyerdahl visited the marshes searching for the material to build a boat. And he was quite famous for having made expeditions and proving that there was connections between civilizations and that the oceans and seas were not barriers, but actually means of engagement. And this, called diffusionism, was quite radical at the time. This is in the 1940s. You know, prior to that, people had thought civilizations grew in isolation from one another. And it's this, if you look at this boat, this is a boat built out of bundles of reeds, very much like that is the same technique used to build the architecture in the marshes. They're cathedral-like motifs, which are like guest houses. Tor over there is, I can't point with this because I have to change it, but Tor is sitting over there and speaking with the Marsh Arabs to get the builders for this boat. So you have these techniques of gathering together and making bundles, and we have evidence of these kind of boats from ancient times, from Akkadian times at least, if not Sumerian as well. And he had brought Armara Indians from Lake Titicaca who still use these kind of boats. These boats have disappeared in Iraq quite a while ago. And they built these boats with the Marsh Arabs. And what really struck me was the language that they had, that they shared. We had started off with having sort of a series of, we're back to that, a series of...
We got the wrong image again.
Yeah, a series of translators from Armara to Spanish, from Spanish to English to Arabic, and then sort of all the way back. But very quickly, they were speaking and communicating together, the Marsh Arabs and these Armara Indians. We built the boat and sailed in 1977 to prove that these kind of boats could have connected the civilizations, you know, the Mesopotamian, the Indus. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
the Indus and then the Nile. And with a crew of 11 from 9 different nationalities. Tor was very much an internationalist and a UN kind of person. We actually sailed with the UN flag and gathered us together. But in Djibouti, when we reached the East African coast, we were immediately, we'd be hearing bombings, and there was a lot of conflict in that area. And we decided to burn the boat, and this is after 5 months at sea. Yet at the time, Rama, he had written to the United Nations to protest against the militarization of this area. And it was sort of like a prophecy, the burning of the boat, that it struck me. This burning of civilization, the destruction that we are seeing. After that period, of course, you had the wars with Kuwait and all the wars, the different wars. But during this period as well, you had the building of dams on the Tigris Euphrates, and very soon you had the desertification of the marshes. Now, here is the trip down the Tigris in 2013, and this boat is called a gufwa, and basically a basket that has been covered in tar, a very primitive one. And I had originally made it online with somebody that didn't know how to do it, because everybody was saying that there was nobody could build it. And we just found a basket maker and built it. So it ended up sort of like a 40% gufwa, but it took me down from southeast Turkey all the way to the marshes in stages. This is 2013, so there's still security issues. Like I said, the main thing was the fact that there was a sort of a real desertification. You couldn't see anybody really using the rivers. There's hardly any life on the rivers. But after that trip, I did my own expeditions and found the last makers of these gufwas in Babylon. During this time as well, there was Ernest Finkel, Professor Ernest Finkel, translated a cuneiform tablet that described the ark as round. And I've always been interested in the idea of the ark, and specifically just how unlike or how alien to the culture of Mesopotamia and the environment of Mesopotamia the Western ark is. There's no connection whatsoever between that ark and the culture of.
Can I ask Rashid, everyone knows the story of Noah's Ark, but is there a geography and a time that most sort of experts agree that this story is based on some real event? Can you just place us at the origin?
We know for sure that there was a flood, and not just in this area, but globally. And this is like between 24 and 8000 BC. We can see, for example, with topographic studies of the Gulf area, that the Tigris-Euphrates rivers actually continued the valley to the Straits of Hormuz. Mm-hmm. So there was definitely flooding. But we also know that there are sort of 350 different flood stories globally. It's not a localized thing. It was a global climatic event. And so there have been flood stories from all over the world, including, for example, from Australia, and the Aborigines have an oral history or story of the floods. But we have this Western model, even though there isn't a Western European flood story. But they've got us through the whole Semitic sort of tradition. So the round boat that you see over there, the round ark that was built in Kerala, again, not using really the material, it sank immediately, as soon as they. And the ark, the Western ark, also, I mean, it's absolutely impossible for it to float. But during the trip down on the river and with the coracle, the Gufwa, I had a sort of an epiphany and the thought that rather than having one big boat that had specially built boat that hadn't been tried before, it could have been rather a gathering of all the different types of boats, the material that made up the village and that would have existed at a time and place. So it would have been a gathering rather than something extraordinary. And we did ARC and actually launched the idea of going for it, building it, with Stephen at Edge of Arabia in 2015, with the first trips to Iraq in 2016. So I owe a debt to Stephen for having believed in this, that this is possible, and for giving me that first initial push. I'd been very, very depressed prior to that with what was happening with ISIS, et cetera, and so forth. And the idea of connecting, going back to Iraq, I think is the main sort of gift of this expedition, or this idea. So here you have the ark that I'm imagining, that's made out of different kinds of bows. You've got the Gufwa in the center. You've got a boat of some sort radiating from it, and you have over here the kelek, which is basically a raft. All these boats are types of boats that you find globally, all over the world, these different types of boats. And I think that's also very important, because what I'm working with is also the idea of having there being a shared vocabulary of making, globally. Things like ropes were not invented by somebody going, eureka, a rope. It exists everywhere else. A bundle exists everywhere else, and you have boats made with these techniques. So I returned in 2016 and started building these gufwas, starting off with fishermen gufwas and getting them larger, because we have evidence of these. Oh, shit. Okay, sorry. We have evidence of these gufwas being 6 meters. So if I just run through, of course,
Can I ask a question just about, at the heart of this project is that, there is a story that everybody knows, the Noah's Ark story, and we all perceive one vessel, and it's normally made out of wood or made out of things. And what do you think drives, because your proposal is so rational and it seems very sort of logical. It's actually very beautiful, and it actually relates to when you see flooding now, how people gather things together to survive. Where did that narrative that's now got, you know, in America, when I was traveling in the RV, you know, people really do believe in the actual big boat.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a guy in Kentucky that's built the theme park with the
Yeah.
actual big boat. So where did that, you know, why did that mythology spread so fast? And why is it so prevalent now in Hollywood?
I think one thing is that the flood story was first recorded around 3500 BC and things like the Gilgamesh. And between that recording and the event, and between the recording and us, it's the same amount of time. So there's a vast amount of time between that. And people generally narrate things in their own image. So, you know, as well as this whole thing of Chinese whispers. So, yeah, from the earliest stories in the, to the Bible, translation, etc., you get all sorts of differences. Yeah, things change.
Wrap up.
I shall wrap up. Anyway, so these are boats that I've been doing, and very importantly, you know, they are iconic for Iraq. And now I'm working in the south, in Huair, with communities to build these sort of iconic boats called mashhoufs. You know, they're very beautiful and recognized by themselves as artworks by the people who make it. Finding the older people, we want to bring these later on out to the rivers of the world, just rushing through. And of course, the main reward is meeting people, you know, getting people together, and that's what's happening. You know? So, yeah.
So thank you, Rashad.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just before we move on to Razan, to reiterate that you know, Rashad is actually building this ark, and he's actually employing communities in Iraq to build one boat at a time. And then the idea of seeing a new proposal for the ark in somewhere like the East River or the Hudson Valley or the Mississippi or the Thames actually is a metaphor for our current climate change approach to climate change, that it is a gathering together of what we have, not some, we were talking about Elon Musk's, not some fantasy spaceship that's going to take us up. And actually, the more you think about this ark mythology, the more you see it in TV shows and in Hollywood right now, that something's going to save us while the time is running out. And I think we'll talk about that a bit later. Razan.
Thank you. That's me. One more time. Okay. I will start talking about the show that I curated that's opening tomorrow and sort of fill that into the context of sustainability and go through the artists that are part of the show. I'm going to start with myself. This is a series of portraits called the 100 Portrait Series. It was actually called Daesh, but then I thought that was too charged. But they're basically portraits of ISIS members. And they're painted on oil. They're each sort of head size, 8 by 10, and there is a grid of 100. In the photo, there's just 84 because I couldn't fit it on a wall. But so the whole concept of this project started when I was thinking about this assignment that I had in art school. And the assignment was to paint 10 monsters. So everyone came back with, you know, crazy monsters, googly eyes, sharp teeth. But I thought about something that hit closer to home, so I thought terrorists. No one really paints terrorists or wants to, you know, spend the time looking them up and look at their faces and sort of get them in with oil paint on canvas. So I thought it would be this cool sort of psychological project to start on. And as soon as I got 10, I sort of went crazy and spent a year painting 100. The sort of concept that evolved while making this piece was sort of debating the history of portraiture in the beginning between the East and West. So how in the Middle East or Islamic tradition, you don't really paint people because it's seen as tampering with the hand of God or attempting perfectionism. Whereas in the West, it's more like idolization or celebrating a loved one or royalty. So I thought this would be a cool concept to sort of start a cross-cultural dialogue between the traditions of Middle Eastern painting and then the West. This also evolved into sort of this project on thinking about terrorism. What makes a terrorist? Are we so different from them? Like, what causes a person to sort of switch gears and decide to run off to the desert in Syria and, you know, make bombs and go crazy? So the dialogues that I've had with people about that has resulted to sort of art being this segue between barriers that are created by religious oppression or censorship, and a form of art is like there for you to express different thoughts that you're not used to expressing with sensitive topics. So yeah, so basically the images were sourced from mugshots, but also selfies and screenshots of propaganda videos and news websites. And this also started a whole research project on how ISIS recruits members. So social media came into the picture because sort of ISIS got to rise through Twitter, basically, and recruiting kids from the US, from Europe, from Africa, and the Middle East through targeting these kids that don't feel like they have a place, a safe space at home, and sort of giving them this place to escape to and be a part of this bigger thing. So yeah, that's my project. The next, uh-oh.
Oh, it's crashed.
It's gone. The show's over. Well, I can still talk about it until she shows up, but Farah Salem is a Chicago-based artist, but she's also from Kuwait. And she's a photographer, and she's studying art therapy as her master's degree. But she sort of is this artist that wants to tackle issues on feminism and religious oppression and like the social, cultural dialogue between the role of men and women in traditional society. So if you caught a glimpse of the picture, it was her in a abaya, and that's like the traditional gown that Middle Eastern women wear, but she was trying to, oh, welcome back. She was trying to reclaim that image by wearing a white one. It's from her series called The Dove, and she put on this gown and went through smaller, lesser-known areas in Kuwait and took these photos. And the photos are sort of her way of showing her reclamation of the traditional gown. And she wanted to express her freedom within it. The background of this is actually a calligrapher called El Cid, who's also part of the program. He's very cool. And yeah, you could see these prints.
I was going to ask, in the show, when you were doing it, you talked about the sort of the image of someone like you or someone like Farah. You know, there was a feeling that your image had been taken away from you, that your identity was being so sort of presented in newspapers or this, just because of where you're from, or this, that the work was kind of an attempt to reclaim that image. Can you talk a bit about that in the context of being in America? Because I think the things that you're showing, especially the first project, is really quite provocative in New York City. Yeah.
I think being in New York just gives us the platform to express things that we can't express back home. So I wouldn't be able to show those ISIS portraits in Kuwait, but having the space to do that here and to do it not just to speak against it, but to open a dialogue and to have it serve as a starter to a conversation. We hope that this translates to the values back home, and then that could cause like a shift in perception and hopefully change the culture behind it. So
do you in terms of the recruitment of young people into extremism, because you know my generation, Ahmed and Abdel Nasser and a lot of our friends in Saudi, they were targeted and they were recruited and they went to schools that became kind of training camps, and then they were asked to go to Afghanistan. You were talking about social media. Are your generation, are you being targeted through social media? Does it connect into your world? Because it's not just this, it is quite creative. There's music videos and, like you were saying, selfies and emoji, that whole world of, you know, targeting young people who might be disillusioned. Is that a reality for people you know? Or?
Not that I know personally, but from the research I did in the project, it's just regular kids. People from, I saw Massachusetts and Kentucky and Belgium and Africa, just kids who are online and expressing their discomfort, I guess, in their current lives, and then that just makes them an easy target for ISIS. But yeah, I definitely think that social media, has its pros and cons, but it is a way, or making art about it, I think, is a way to just bypass the negative aspects of it.
2 minutes.
2 minutes? Oh no. Okay. So we have this artist, Samer Fouad, who has a funny story about his installation. So we were in the basement of ArtX, and there was this random shower in the middle of the spot. So we thought we could fill the shower with an installation. And he had this installation called To Seek Refuge. It's about the refugee crisis and in Syria, and it has an animated GIF of a faceless woman that rotates. He tries to speak about the loss of identity when you are labeled or seen as a refugee or an immigrant. It's also an interactive installation, so from the outside it would say immigrant, but when you go inside, there's a poster that you can hold that says refugee. So he talks about sort of that invisible border of how that label switches and how a person loses their identity in the process. Sorry, I have to speed. But this is Kuki Jijo, or Tariq Sultan. He's an artist from Kuwait who does these really cool iPad sketches on screenshots or scans of magazines and Instagram posts. So he sort of tries to talk about pop culture, consumerism, but also iconography, and sort of using the method of cartoonifying into speaking of culture and tradition and Islamic aesthetics. But he also has a project on censorship, so how magazines are somewhat censored in the Middle East to cover parts of the woman body that they don't want to show. He sort of uses that as his mode of expression.
Good
and yeah,
timing.
That's the last one.
I just
We
got the
have
wrap up from Kate.
A video,
so
I think.
thank you, Razan.
Yeah. Ahad's video.
Sorry?
Ahad's video.
Oh, yeah. Do we have
We
that?
can play a little.
We can just play a little
snippet.
bit. Yeah, sorry, we had one. Video 1. That was my cue.
Yeah.
Video 1.
Sorry.
Oh, perfect.
Oh, can we hit play? Sweet.
Okay, that's enough. Maybe just walk, just 30 seconds on that video.
Okay. That video was by artist Ahad Al-Amoudi. She's based in Saudi Arabia. It just speaks on, well, first of all, the song that re-emerged from underground suddenly and became this viral hit because of social media. And she actually created the traditional gown using photos from Instagram. And the dance is, used to be a dance on like, in the middle of the desert, just men, but now it's like a wedding dance. So she made this whole video about celebrating, yeah, that song.
So we were,
Very sarcastic.
in Razan's show, there's this like young energy and there's this social media focus and this expertise at playing with these technologies that actually my generation sort of had to keep changing phones and everything was uncomfortable and stressful and wires and new plugs and new adapters and we were stressing to get audiences. But actually in the Arab world, they have the highest use of social media in the world per person, the highest per capita consumption and production of social media. So in terms of getting a message out or sharing information, it's that generation that we're interested to engage in the Sustainable Development Goals and think how that can be used for a force for good rather than just cat videos and this kind of stuff. It's happening a lot. Sorry, we're running a little bit behind. Matthew, I believe you have a video.
Yep.
And would you like to introduce it?
Yeah, I was going to say, Actually, there's some cats in my video as well. Um, yeah, my name's Matthew. I'm an artist. It's actually really nice to be here under this umbrella of the 17 goals that the UN has. So as an artist, excuse me, is actually, basically what you're going to see is a reiteration of artists playing a role in how some of these larger initiatives can be put forward and how those gaps could be filled or how new thoughts could be put together. I put together this video. It's in 3 different sections. The first 2 sections, I'm going to be taking one of the goals and illustrating with 2 works. And then the last one we'll just say is kind of Middle East meets Middle West, if that makes any sense. That's quick. So video.
Video 2.
This being, yeah. Here at Pacific Street Park in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we're going to use the Park Spark project, transforming dog waste into energy to power public art. First thing we'll do is we'll wait until the dog does its business, and then we'll scoop it up in one of these biodegradable bags that's offered by the Park Spark project. Pop it in there. Stir is a little wheel here. You can spin this thing, and it goes right to the tank. And this mixes up the water and the dog waste inside. Methane is about 30 to 70 times more potent than carbon dioxide, so by burning it, you're actually reducing it to just carbon dioxide and water, which is a great thing for the park. Get involved and build a project that uses the energy from the methane. And this has the digester with a little tube coming off of it, powering a kettle for some tea. So it's this free source of energy that can be used in any way the community wants to use it. I was invited to Boulder, Colorado to do a project where they have the highest density of climate scientists. So they have these federal labs, so all this research is there, but it's a foodie town. So I asked these 40 scientists there, what are plants and natural resources leaving this area in the next 20 to 40 years? I see. And so we actually asked all these chefs to cook that food, and we presented it as this table. The project's called Harm to Table, playing off Farm to Table. So in essence, we're translating data into an experience. This is a menu of what you'd be eating. So these are plants that would be leaving this area. And we had music. This is a darker work for me. It's kind of like the burning of Rome. You're eating the last of this landscape. So everything was gravity fed. You have 2 soup and 2 kombuchas and chocolate. They go down these copper pipes, and everybody can serve themselves. Trying to connect people to their direct environment. This was another goal that I thought played into a lot of the works I do.
In January 2011, artist Matthew Mazzara was invited by the Coleman Center for the Arts to organize an artwork with the people of York, Alabama. During his initial visit to York, the artist asked people from the community to bring something from their living rooms so that they could recreate a living room outdoors in the middle of the street as a way to provoke discussion about what were on people's minds and to generate ideas about what direction they might go in. From the discussions in this outdoor living room, they identified that York really had a lack of public spaces that are truly open to everyone, and as they listened to each other's stories and experiences of York, this became a common thread. They also identified that the many abandoned houses all over the downtown have been bringing down the look and feel of York for years. From this conversation, they developed a project that uses the materials of an abandoned house, as well as the land it sits on, to build a smaller house on the footprint of the old house. Open House is a unique event space. It is a collaboration with the people of York, Alabama, to transform a blighted property in York's downtown into a new public art project that has the shape of a house, but can physically transform into a 100-seat open-air theater free for the public to enjoy shows, plays, movies, event people can think of that supports community life in New York. And when the theater is folded back up into the shape of a house, the property is a public park for anyone to enjoy. Open House directly addresses the lack of public space in York, Alabama, by using the concept of transformation to turn an abandoned building into a new community space. It provides opportunities for people to come together for years to come.
Theater is a unique event space that transforms Main Street into an outdoor theater. It is a collaboration with the people of Lyons, Nebraska and the surrounding towns to seamlessly weave art into their downtown. The artist first begins the project by asking people from the community to join him in a living room placed on Main Street as a way to provoke discussion and capture stories and ideas from people that might not feel they have anything to contribute to an artwork. During those Main Street discussions, many community members reveal fond memories of a once thriving downtown and express a strong desire to see the downtown become the center of community life once again. One local person points out that one of the buildings is only a storefront, a wall with no building behind it, just an empty lot. Residents of Lyons came forward to bring their diverse and highly skilled talents to the project, shaping the final design and bringing many other members of the community into the final work of art. Before the retractable storefront wall is even conceived, another Lyons resident, who says he doesn't mind being called eccentric, enters the story. Bill Hedges, a local mail carrier, recently retired and decided to take up his lifelong passion of movie making. When Bill first hears of the project, he expresses interest and gives a tour of his basement that includes a personal movie theater, a recreation of a 1950s coffee shop that features a working jukebox, and a full replica of the interior of the spaceship from the 1960s TV show Lost in Space. Bill's passion for the TV show does not end with what he created in his basement. He also recently bought one of the empty storefronts downtown and turned it into a movie set depicting the spaceship's landing site. While building his movie set, Bill also starts to amass a collection of video-making equipment and explains his idea to write and shoot original science fiction movies and cast his cat as the main actor, since he decided that human actors would be too costly and unpredictable in their scheduling. When asked, Bill is more than happy to write and shoot a movie called Decades for the project that has downtown Lyons as its focus. People from Lyons and the surrounding community show up as actors dressed in costumes and with vintage cars that match the time period. He stages scenes such as the old telephone switchboard operator, conversations in the coffee shop, and the elaborate montage of Saturday nights on Main Street in the 1960s. On a warm night in November, the Main Street of Lyons, which is usually empty after dark, fills with people from the community and beyond for the opening of the Storefront Theater and the debut of the movie Decades. As parents, grandparents, and children of all ages gather on Main Street to witness something experimental in their own downtown, they sit side by side to see themselves, their neighbors, and the town they call home reflected so clearly back to them. The Storefront Theater taps directly into the opportunity that exists in rural towns across America to creatively repurpose and reprogram downtown buildings that once were the backbone of community life into new sites of experience, interaction, and dialogue. The message on this night is simple. People that sit together can dream together.
The project has been going for about 3 years, and this is just last month we had the government help support a project.
My name is Jay Rahman, and I'm the director of the Cultural Programs Division in what we call the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. And we are the sponsors of the Center Stage Initiative, which has brought Yusra Awar and her band to Lyons, Nebraska tonight.
So this is an experience that would probably never happen otherwise, besides art actually penetrating into this social fabric. The last little bit I'll just share is, I do these outdoor living rooms, as you saw. I'm always an outsider, so how do I know anything about anything? when I walk in. I always start with this open notebook, and we start to do these. This is trying to capture voices of people that don't go to meetings, are not representing themselves, maybe don't have time or have that sensibility. So try to go into their public spaces. This is here in the Bronx a couple months ago. And this was in Jeddah, we did 2 years ago. I worked with these students because I didn't speak Arabic. And we can speak about that later if we like.
Yeah, I got wrap up ages ago for you.
Thank you for being generous.
That's okay, no problem. Thank you so much. You know, it's not as easy as it seems to link artists together with the Sustainable Development Goals, because there's artists kind of making work about a theme, but here you've seen different artists actually being the theme or actually creating a solution. And I think that one of the things that ties all three of you together is this experience between sort of East and West, if you like, or Arab world and USA, if we want to frame it like that. Just starting with Matthew and then going through, can you talk a little bit about that journey you went to Saudi Arabia, and when perhaps that big narrative of sort of that they're very different places, that they're somehow in opposition, and yet you took a common theme to that narrative?
Okay, I try.
Was that a question?
That's a question, I think.
Yeah.
You know, everybody looks at all the differences. Are there similarities? You know, I'm sure we all have them. And then, you know, the media is responsible for giving us a lot of this narrative between the Middle East and the United States, or let's say North America. And I think that, yeah, artists can play such a role in trying to tell these alternative narratives, because how do you get the texture? How do you know what a place is like? And I think that artists have a real role to be able to basically challenge that narrative or shape it in a way that gives empathy and an entrance into it. For me, I'm always the outsider, so here's another town. Lyons, Nebraska means nothing to me. Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, Singapore. These are all places. What are the issues? Where is the city or the local government not taking care of an issue, or the community? Can we find that, and can we make an artwork that allows people to enter into that issue and explore it more together? One thing I realize is in the United States is there's a phenomenon of, you know, rural America. As you saw, the main streets are all kind of dying and dead. And this is through globalization, Amazon one-click, you know, economies of scale. The mom and pop store cannot handle that kind of business model anymore. So all these downtowns that were built for commerce are all gone. The same thing happened when I got to Jeddah. You have Al Balad, the old city. It was designed for a certain type of commerce. Cars cannot get in there. Air conditioners allow people to sprawl. It's abandoned in certain ways. Obviously, it has commerce, but it's a different thing. Anyways, I leave it at that.
What about you, Rashid? Because you're working in such a complicated story and reality between Iraq and the United States, and you're working on this this story that actually everybody is universal, and this theme that is arguably the most urgent of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is the climate change crisis. So how are you navigating that thing between, you know, being from Iraq and wanting to tell this international story, especially, you know, you've just arrived in the US, so I'm not going to ask you what you think about it, but that wasn't a question either. Yeah. But I'm going to leave it at that. Please comment.
First thing really is I've dropped. I was an activist for quite a while, directly looking at the issues and protesting them, but I've dropped that politics. I mean, the situation now in Iraq is just so completely disastrous that there isn't even any room now for politics in a way, as an artist speaking. It has to be directly engaged with it. Secondly, it's questioning really what is art and what is my role as an artist? What is an artist? Because art is a Western concept, it's an Eastern concept, but they're two different types of art. I mean, the Western concept of art being an object or made or that is abstract or alien from or differentiated from lived reality is not one shared in the East. You know, traditionally, art in a lot of cultures around the world, not just in the East, is a lived reality. It's an engagement with the material, with the crafts, with the way what you dress, what's around you. That's collapsed. This is what's critical. So in Iraq, what you have is a collapse of the crafts that connected between the environment and society. So we've got a lot of artists, great artists, all over the world, but we don't have a craft movement.
Do you see your kind of positioning as a new type of artist?
I think it's a new type of art that is possibly the oldest type of art.
Right.
You know? And a reiteration of this essential role of the artist as being that medium between the environment and the needs and the expression of a culture. So it's not a matter of only returning these crafts of boats, etc., but looking to them as means of solutions, you know, of work, you know, from the local environment. I think that's it. I feel a great deal of responsibility, you know, and in what I'm seeing in Iraq and the need to re-engage.
I'm just going to bring in Razan, because you framed that Eastern-Western thing as something where you said that you're going to talk about things here that you couldn't talk about there as a way to influence your reality there. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so a lot of the artists that move to the States or to Europe to study art are sort of looking for an outlet to express things that they're frustrated with or that they're not excited about, or something that they don't want to be censored for speaking out against. Or so I see art as sort of this digestible form of information that they are more free to express here, that they can transform the core values and traditions of back home. So it's not just about making art here and being quiet. It's about making art here and hoping it translates, and then hoping that affects a change.
And what do you think? You know, the two artists either side of you, they don't really sell their work. They're not part of any kind of trajectory into a famous gallery, or I mean, Rashad's working on a museum show, but you know, you're about to have your first show in a hot spot of New York. Probably maybe someone will come and buy your work, and you'll go into that world of the traditional kind of art, what a Western artist does, and you're just looking at Matthew and Rashad's work, which is not about the object, it's about the impact, and it's not even often about them. It's about the people that, you know, who take part in the project, like Bill, or like the people who are making the boats, which isn't you, it's you're kind of overseeing the project. How do you feel about this as a model for an artist? Is it something new to you, or do you think that it's in opposition to the kind of prevailing idea of the artist that young people aspire to?
I don't think there's anything negative with either side. I think there's values that you can get from being like the idea maker and having that work itself out into something that's bigger than yourself. And then there's the value in you being the forefront of sort of what you want to express and like how you want to. Oh no.
No. Kate's just got a sign saying
end.
Like the end.
In red.
Yeah.
12 o'clock, Cinderella.
I think we were going to have some Q&As. We could ask Kelly. Could we have Kelly? Could we have? Where's Kelly? Could we have a little bit of time for some Q&As?
I would just do maybe one more question on the panel.
Okay. I can't see Kelly. No permission for that. I am going to actually break with Kate's rule. I'm going to ask: is there any question from the audience? Because I think we should just one question maybe. Sorry, we've gone on too long. Would anyone like to ask a question to any of the panelists? There. Very good. Yes, please. Yeah, there should be a microphone, but. Here comes somebody.
Okay. My first name is Siba, and my last name is Das. Siba Das. I'm a retired UN official, and I now write about art. Okay. So I was struck by, I think, one thematic conclusion that I might draw from the presentations this evening is that there's an acute need, a strong need, a powerful need to reestablish or to create, an interactive connection between so-called fine art on the one side and artisanal art on the other side, so to speak. Okay, because as you said, Rajan, that the artisanal arts are dying. There's obviously a need to stop that, to reverse that process. And perhaps, you see, so-called fine artists, could facilitate that, could work very actively with the artisans of the world in order to reverse the trend towards the dissolution of the artisanal arts, which is happening in many, many countries, all around the world, not only in developing countries, but also in the developed countries. The old artisanal industries are dying, and there is a need to revive them, to recreate them, to reinvent them so that they meet contemporary needs, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously, what you need is scaling. And one way of scaling would be to pursue this interaction between art and artisanship. That's my point.
I think not so much a question, but a lovely comment to end on. I think we all agree. We're gonna run out of time. I will say one thing, because I'm about to introduce Robert Skinner from the UN Partnerships Department. Robert, before you get up, I want to say that actually it's not such a big audience, so we're all actually going to a reception afterwards in a private residence, but my team will be upstairs at a table. If you would like to join there, you'd be most welcome, and we will all be there, and we would love to carry on the discussions. This event is really a springboard for a year of programming where we're going to look at how artists can link with the Sustainable Development Goals, how artists between New York and the Arab world as two centers of energy, cultural energy, political energy, economic energy, could create models that other people could follow. So I would now like to invite Robert Skinner from the Partnerships Department at the UN to sort of wrap this up with a call to action, because this is not about just talking, this is about an opportunity for us all to act. So thank you very much.
Great. There are lots of lessons to be learned tonight, and my first lesson is never be the UN bureaucrat that follows three fascinating artists to the stage. Because they told the story much better than I can, from the UN side. But it truly has been great to be here and be part of this conversation and hear the sustainable goals translated into the language of action and activity. And you were talking about a call to action. I feel like I don't even really need to make one. I mean, the example's here. It's from, the panel that you just heard from and all the work they're doing, to drive what we're trying to do through the UN, through governments, through the private sector, through cultural institutions, through civil society, to do things. As Marie Rudil indicated, culture and arts are so important to the work of UNESCO. It's important to the work that all of us are doing at the United Nations. That's why I'm so pleased to be part of the conversation tonight and to be here. And we know that since the goals were adopted in 2015, that we've had to push past just the governments to bring in all of these different sectors to be part of it, and that's what my office is all about, really. The UN Office for Partnerships, and I always emphasize the word for when I'm talking about our office, because we see our job as bringing people together and then having them go off and take actions together. The UN can be a great convener, a great body that brings these different sectors together, particularly arts and cultural communities together, to take action on the goals, because arts and culture really transcend the language that we use at the UN. And I joke about being a UN bureaucrat. I am one, and I can say, that some of the language we use is difficult. You know, even the term sustainable development goals, when we were creating these, we had big debates about it. You know, what do we call these? What are we going to do with these goals to be inspirational, to get people to really take action? I'm not quite sure we totally got it right, but we can use arts and culture to deliver the message and drive that home because it is transcendent and because it is something that all people relate to. It crosses borders. It doesn't, you know, only know one culture. We see artists and we see folks from the cultural world coming together to do these kinds of amazing things. And I think that's really what it's about. And my call to action would be, you know, get behind culture, get behind the arts, participate in your communities, be part of this, because the goals are not, they're called the global goals in some circles. The civil society folks that we work with often call them the global goals, and that's great, but it's really about delivering locally. Everyone can get involved. You see from the smallest towns in the US, to the Tigris River, you know, to the Bronx, you know, to all these art installations that are going to be taking place over the next several months, you know, through this program. Everyone can get involved. You know, it's not about us at the UN, it's about all the peoples of the world coming together to drive this action to make the world a better place. So I think we should give the panel one more round of applause because that was amazing. And thanks to all the partners for bringing this together to make meaningful change. And thanks to all of you for being here and being part of this. Good night.
I was just going to say one word, if it's there, is that thank you for coming. And we are having this reception. I know some of you are invited, but do visit the table upstairs. Anthony, there's someone there with the address. Yeah, that'll be Anthony. And you're most welcome to carry on the conversation and have a bit of socializing. Thank you so much.